we might as well reread the first time we read yesterday. The debate was if you how to handle saying Mashi V'Roch Merdi Geshem on Shmini Atzeret if you live in Chutz La'aretz. So Simchas Torah is also Safek Shmini Atzeret, and the Gemara had a few options. One is you say it on Musaf of Shmini Atzeret, then you stop saying it, and then you say it on Musaf of Simchas Torah. The Gemara said that's not possible because if you said it on Musaf of Shmini Atzeret, you signal that the day was Kodesh Shmini Atzeret. You can't treat the rest of the day not that way by stop saying it. So it said, okay, you say it on Musaf and Mincha, and then you'll stop saying it Marav of Simchas Torah. At least that way the whole day ends by being treated as Shmini Atzeret, and then you do a reboot, and you start on Simchas Torah as if you hadn't been saying it before. And Rava rejects all of this, and top of Hamad Aleph, Rava, Markivan Shehitchio Shuvein Posei. Once you began saying Mashi V'Ruach and Shmini Atzeret, there's no sense in stopping it again and restarting it on Simchat Torah. Not only there's no sense, but it's like it's contradictory. You've already signaled that it's the beginning of the time of rain, and therefore you continue saying it. And said Miller said Rav Sheshas, once you start, you don't stop. V'af Rav Haderpei, and even Rav reversed himself. Rav, who said the very strange position that you say it on Musaf of Shmini Atzeret and then you stop saying it until Musaf of Simchas Torah. The Amar of Chanan al Amarav Mona Esrim Vechad Yom K'derech Shemona Asar Yamim Rosh Hashanah Vad Yom Kippurim. You count 21 days the same way you count 10 days from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur. What that means exactly, I'll get back to why you need the comparison. But you count 21 days. 21 days will get you to Shvi Shel Sukkos. And then you begin saying Mashi V'Roch Merdi Geshem the day after, day 22. And here's where Rav reversed himself. Once you begin saying, you do not interrupt it, you don't do a reboot for Simchas Torah. The Hilchas, and that's the halacha. Once you begin, you do not stop. Now, what does this line mean? Like you count 10 days from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur. Actually, they say, well, it's just telling you how to count the number of days. But the problem, of course, is that it's the opposite. From Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, there is not 10 days from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur unless you include the endpoints. Whereas here, he's saying count 21 days and then start saying Mashi V'Roch Merdi Geshem on the following day. So it's actually not similar to the idea of 10 days of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, right? Because that's counting the endpoints, and here it's not counting the endpoints. So Rashi suggests what it means is that we're dealing at a time where there still was Kiddush HaChodesh, and therefore, potentially, it's possible you don't know which day is the real Rosh Hashanah, right? If it's 2 days Rosh Hashanah, is the real first day Rosh Hashanah number 1, or is the real day number 2? So what Rav is saying is, well, go back and figure out 10 days prior to Yom Kippur, because by the time you did Yom Kippur, you hopefully knew at that stage what the real Rosh Hashanah was. And therefore, if the same starting point you had to count 10 days to Yom Kippur, that'll be the same starting point to count 21 days to get you to, Shmini Atzeret.
Really, Yom Kippur, little Rosh Hashanah.
Or whatever. Or the same way you would count 10 days from Rosh Hashanah, whichever you'd use as your Rosh Hashanah to count 10 days to Yom Kippur, that's the Rosh Hashanah. Again, it's a very funny why you need that whole comparison, what the whole point of all of that is. So let me suggest, though, something about the idea of counting 21 days and why that's mentioned. Because I think, again, what comes up in this discussion, it's very bizarre, the idea of, we made it to Shmini Atzeret, but Simchas Torah is a Safek Shmini Atzeret, so we have to somehow restart it on Simchas Torah. Presumably, the reason you're saying Mashi V'Roch Merdi Geshem is because it's the time of rain. And once you have avoided the problem of raining in your sukkah, which you do by waiting till the middle of the day of Shmini Atzeret, you start saying Mashi V'Roch because it's the time of rain and there's no problem of Siman Klala. That's presumably the reason. Meaning it has nothing to do with Shmini Atzeret per se. It has to do with the fact that now is the rainy season, and you're no longer bothered. Sukkot is no longer an interruption. So who cares if Simchas Torah is a Safek Shmini Atzeres? Once it's the rainy season, and you no longer are sitting in your sukkah, you start saying, end of story. And the fact that, is that clear? It's sort of like, you said, Zion Mar Cheshvan, we start saying, Tein Talmud, but based on Sfeik of the Yoma, it's like, what? It's like, it's about the date being the appropriate date, the calendar date. And I think the fact that the Gemara was grappling over that and thought that you would restart on Simchas Torah again shows this idea of wanting to link this to a Yontiv. wanting to actually not, have it. And if you think again about the whole comparison about the lulav and the arava, that was Rabbi Eliezer's argument that you start at the beginning of Sukkot. But now that we actually are doing it, both we begin it on Sukkot, we end it on Pesach, and we do the shift, both on Sukkot and Pesach. There seems to be an idea to link it actually to the Yom Tov. Yom Tov is also the days that the Gemara said in Rosh Hashanah is B'chag Nidonim Al Hamayim, and Sukkot and Pesach where we do the other shift, like Nidonim, right, Al Tvua. So somehow there's an idea of, I think, connecting this liturgy specifically, to replace maybe the Lulav and the Arava, at least in the Sukkot case, but somehow to have a connection directly to the Yom Tov. And we mentioned this as well in terms of why you do it at Musaf, maybe because everybody is there at Musaf, but also because Musaf is the identifying, it is the Shemona Esrei which embodies the full identity of the Yom Tov. So I think it's fascinating that the Gemara feels that because of Sveika Diyoma, it's possible we should restart the whole thing on Simchas Torah, which really shows that connection to Yom Tov. That might be the emphasis at the end. So when in the end Rav says Kivan Sheichel Shuvein Posei, he's not necessarily disagreeing with that idea. He might just be saying, yes, it is connected to the identity of Yom Tov, but you can't go ahead start reversing yourself. Once you start, you just have to continue. By the fact that when Rav Chananel Amarav says a different way of framing it, 21 days, he's completely playing down the idea that it's on Shmini Atzeres. But he doesn't say you say it on Yom Tov Achron Shel Chag. He says say 21 days after Rosh Hashanah, right? Oh, it happens to be Shmini Atzeres. And I think, what? No, I mean after 21 days. You're right. Now after 21 days. But the point is that he completely has ignored the fact that you start saying it on a Yom Tov, on Shmini
Atzeres. He's making it to Nidonim Al Hamayim. He's making the link back to Rosh Hashanah.
Because it's a Chag of Din. Maybe.
Is less important.
It could be.
Din is what's
maybe. It could be. It's the period of Din. But I also do think that it's fascinating how it downplays the idea that it's Shmini Atzeres. And that was what really got central to the concern earlier of the Gemara. Well, Simchas Torah, Shmini Atzeres. Whoever said it was about Shmini Atzeres, count 21 days, start saying it afterwards. And it's a very different way of thinking about when you start saying Mashi Faruach. Okay?
All right, why do you think the phrase is Hitchil de'eno posei? Why do you need she'eno posei? Hitchil.
No, because there are suggestions where you were posek, that you start again Shmi Simchas Torah. You stop saying it, Mariv and Shachris of Simchas Torah. That was the suggestion. All right, so now we continue the next. What?
Related to any of this in terms of what Hoshana
Well, it certainly is true. I mean, thank you for mentioning that. Of course, it is true, that Hoshana Rabbah, talking about the Ritzui al Hamayim, right, the whole emphasis of Arava, and Arava's requiring a lot of water, and all of the, Hoshanas and all of that, it's, there's a lot there that's actually explicit about the Mayim, in Hoshana, in the liturgy we've developed about Hoshana Rabbah. And you're right, that's exactly the transition to start saying Mashi Faruah. But you don't start it on Hoshana Rabbah itself, right?
Our practice, certainly Ashkenazi practice is to say the Nusach Tefillah on Hoshana Rabbah as if it were Yom Kippur.
Right.
Do the Chachamim in the Gemara also link Din to Hoshana Rabbah?
No, that's an interesting question about Hoshana Rabbah, and a lot of that gets developed post Gemara, but there's interesting studies on that, and exactly it's whether there are hints to that idea even earlier. But let's not get distracted. Okay, next Mishnah. Ad Masai Sholi Mesek Shamim, to when you ask for rain. Now, again, what's interesting is that the Mishnah following this is going to say when do you start asking, and that's going to be the issue of the third of Mar Cheshvan, the seventh of Mar Cheshvan, and that would, of course, been the logical progression. Mashi Faruach, when do you start asking for rain? Tein Talamata, when do you stop? The fact that it's going out of order probably here has to do with the fact that when we get to the next Mishnah, it talks about start asking for rain. That then begins a arc where it says, okay, you started asking for rain in Mar Cheshvan, but then there was no rain. So what do? So now you have to start fasting. So therefore, it's because we want to transition into the discussion of if there is no rain, the need to start fasting, we reverse the order here, and we don't ask when do you start, we ask when do you stop. And the next Mishnah is going to say when you start. Okay? So ad matai sholi mesek Yishamim, till when you say tein tal matar. Rabbi Yehuda Omer ad ki yavor haPesach, until Pesach is done. Earlier we learned how to reconcile this with our practice and another statement of Rabbi Yehuda, which is until the first day of Pesach. Okay? So the simplest answer is two versions of Rabbi Yehuda. This says till Pesach is done. The other one will say until for the first day of Pesach. Rabbi Meir Omer, Ad sheyetze Nisan, until Nisan is all complete. You say throughout the end of Nisan. Shenemar ve'yored lachem geshem u'moreh u'malkosh barishon. God will bring down to you the rain. Moreh is the early rain. Malkosh is the late rain. Barishon in the first month in Nisan. This was in Yoel when there had been drought for 3 years, and then they were going to, finally God was going to bring the rain, and it said, and it was Nisan, and this would all happen in Nisan. Of course, that was a very unique situation, so how to learn out from there. But from here he learns the idea that rain is appropriate even throughout the end of Nisan. So the Gemara says, Amalei Rav Nachman Rav Yitzchak, so Rav Nachman said to Rav Yitzchak, Yoreh b'Nisan, so he wasn't even bothered with, the Tana here, Rebbe Meir. Okay, you got a pasuk that shows that it can rain through Nisan, but the problem he had was with the pasuk. Malkosh is the late rain. That happens in Nisan, fine, but Yoreh is the earlier rain. Since when is early rain in Nisan? Yoreh b'Mar Cheshvan, the early rains come in Mar Cheshvan. Tanya, we done it right. So Yoreh b'Mar Cheshvan and Malkosh b'Nisan. The early rain, right from the pasuk in Shema, Yoreh Malkosh. Yoreh comes in Mar Cheshvan, and the Malkosh, the late rain, comes in Nisan. So what does the pasuk mean? Amalei Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. This is what Rabbi Yochanan said. Bimei Yoel ben Patuel nitkayim mikrazeh. This was in the time of Yoel. If you look at the side, you see it's a pasuk from Yoel. It says Yeser hagezem achal harbeh. It's talking about anything left over by one plague of locusts was eaten by the next plague of locusts. So it was very obviously very bad years. And also Shana Yatza Adar V'lo Yardu Geshamim. Already Adar had passed, and there had been no rain for the entire. It's sort of like what this Masechet is dealing with when there's no rain. And it keeps on being no rain, and it's already now Nisan. So that happened that year. Yarda lahem riviyah rishona be'echad b'Nisan. So the first rain, that's like riviyah, and we'll talk about what these words mean, yoreh, riviyah, etc. You might already pick up that there's certain sexual metaphors going on here. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, but there's sexual metaphors going on here. Okay. I mean, I guess I might as well just put on the table. The Gemara is going to be explicit about it. But if you think about it, right, the rain comes down and it penetrates Mother Earth, and then from which grows out, comes life. Seed, right? Seeds grow, exactly. So yoreh, right? Like your yoreh achet. Yoreh is to shoot an arrow, right? So and riviyah, harba'ah is a word for sex, particularly sex with animals. But anyway, roveah and nirba are words used for for animals. So anyway, but those are words for sexual intercourse. Anyway, so those are the words that are used here for rain. But Yarda lehem riviyah rishona be'echad. Okay, so the first one came be'echad b'Nisan, the early rain, which normally would be in Mar Cheshvan, came in Nisan. And normally there would be a couple of early rains, as we'll see. But the first one came in first of Nisan. Amalem Navali Yisrael. So Yoel said to the people, Tzu'u zaru, go and plant your seeds. Amrlo, they said to him, if you have one measure of wheat or 2 measures of barley, what should you do? Should you eat it? Now we're starving. What should we do? We should either, eat. If you had this choice, would you eat it and stay alive? Or would you plant it on the hope that it would sprout forth? And how long is it going to take it to sprout forth anyway? Obviously, we have to focus more on our immediate survival. We can't start going ahead and planting. So where were we? Okay. So Amar lahem. Wait a minute. I hear your logic, but nevertheless, tzu'u v'zaru. Go and plant. Just trust in me. Go plant. Nazal lahem nes. So a miracle occurred. And they found grain stored in walls and in the holes of the what are the malim?
Antils, right?
Antils, right? Antils. So now there's an interesting debate between Rabbeinu Hananel and Rashi. Which is the grain they ate and which is the one they planted? Rashi says they planted what they had stored up for their own sustenance. Rashi makes it more powerful in terms of their faith. They planted what they had stored up. They listened to him, and then after they planted it, they found extra grain to eat to survive while they were waiting for the grain to come out. Rabbeinu Hananel says no. First the nays happened, and they found this extra grain, and they planted the extra grain. They held on to their old grain to keep on eating to sustain themselves. So anyway, but Rashi has it much more of an act of faith. Okay, Yotzu v'zaru. They went and they planted. planted. Sheni v'shlishi v'revi, the second, the third, and the fourth of Nisan. The Yarda lehem reviyah shniya b'chamisha b'Nisan, and on the 5th of Nisan, the second rain came down. Presumably, you plant after the first rain, and then the second rain is needed to help the crops grow. Hikrivu Omer b'shisha sar b'Nisan, and by the 16th of Nisan, the grain had grown to the full height. This is like a midrash the Gemara had earlier. What happened when Bnei Yisrael went into Eretz Yisrael? Like it grew the full height in 11 days. Nimsas tu'ah gedela b'shisha chadashim. So what happened was grain that normally takes 6 months to grow, gedela b'chadasar yom, grew in 11 days. Nimsa Omer hakarev mitruasha shisha chadashim, and the Omer that's normally brought from grain that's 6 months, karev mitruasha l'chadasar yom, was brought from grain that had grown in 11 days. So it was a tremendous miracle. Also adore who Omer, and regarding that generation, it says Hazorim bedima berina yiktsoru. So they were planting with tears, not just because of the previous famine, but also because they were giving up what they had stored to sustain themselves. So they were like crying at the need that they were planting it, and who knows what was going to happen. But berina yiktsoru, and they harvested it and rejoicing. In 11 days, it all grew. Now haloch yelechu bacho nosei meshach hazara. So what does that mean? Going and crying. Nosei meshach hazara, carrying normally it means like the pouch of seeds. So my haloch yelechu vacho nosei meshach. So what does that mean? Amar Rabbi Yehuda, sure, not only the people, which we've covered in the pasuk of Hazorim bedima berina yitzoru, but even the ox, kashu choreish holechu bochet. When it's plowing, it's crying because it's working and it has nothing to sustain itself. And when it returns, it eats like little shoots that are coming out from the furrow that already on its way back things are starting to sprout forth. So even for the ox, even immediately on its way back, V'zeu bo yavo birina. My nosei alumotav, carry his, the sheaves. So Amar Rabbi Chizda v'amilei b'masnisa tana. Kana zeres shibolet zartayim. It was such a miracle, or maybe this is now we're talking about in messianic times, which is unclear if we're still looking at back to Yoel times. But anyway, it would be one unit would be the straw. And one zeret. A zeret is like the span from the finger to from the thumb to the pinky. And two units would be the actual grain, right? A normal stalk of grain is like 80% straw and like 20% grain. So here it's saying no, it's a third straw and 2/3 grain. That would be the miracle. Okay, I'm not sure where they get it from the pasuk. All right, now if you notice though, this started fine. So that's how. The pasuk that says Moreh umalkosh barishon, that even the Moreh, even the early rain, the Reviyah Rishonah happened in Nisan, and then also the later rain, the Malkosh. What
does the word Malkosh mean?
We'll get to it. The Gemara will look at these words later. Okay, I gave you a hint towards the significance. All right. Told you. Anyway, but if you notice, that discussion began with Rav Nachman saying things to Rav Yitzchak. And now we're going to have a whole series of Rav Nachman and saying things to Rav Yitzchak, and it's really going to get us into an agadic focus. So, Amalei Rav Nachman Rav Yitzchak. Rav Nachman said to Rav Yitzchak, "My dechsiv," what's meant by the verse, "Ki kara Hashem l'ra'av v'gam ba el haaretz sheva shanim." God has called to the famine, and it's come to the land for 7 years. V'hanach sheva shanim ma'yachol. What did they eat for the 7 years when there was no rain and there was famine? So Amalei, Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. This is what Rabbi Yochanan says. Shana Rishona achlu masha bebatim. The first year they ate what was stored up in the house. By the way, if you notice that earlier when we introduced the whole discussion from the pasuk of Yoel Makosh, Rav Yitzchak's response also was Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So it's Rav Nachman saying something to Rav Yitzchak, and Rav Yitzchak saying Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So the first year they ate what was stored in the house. The second year they ate what sort of grew on its own in the fields.
There was a famine.
There's a famine, but still there's some stuff that's left and still growing from its own, from what nutrients were left. Maybe there's stuff on the trees. Shlishis basar behemata, right? It sort of like also reminds you of the psukim by Yosef, right? When they start having the famine and they start having to eat their animals, and then their animals are done, and then what's left. So the third year they ate kosher animals. The fourth year they started eating non non-kosher animals. Chamishit basar shkatzim v'ramasim. The 5th year they started eating like rodents. Shishit, the 6th year, basar b'neihem u'bnotehem, which is really, evoking the psukim in Yirmiyahu about, right, and like an eicha, like what happens, what happened in the, in the siege of Yerushalayim. So we eat the 7th year, basar zro'otehem. They even ate their own flesh, the flesh of their arms. L'kayim asher nemar, to fulfill the verse, ish basar zro'o yochelu. A person will even eat the flesh off of his own arms. So that was cheery. We're going to get better. So now Rav Yitzchak. So he's asking him a pasuk, and Rav Yitzchak is answering with what Rabbi Yochanan said. So again, the exact same structure. What's meant by the verse? B'kirbecha kadosh. In your midst is the holy. V'lo avo be'ir, and I won't come into the city. What does that mean? Mishum debikirbecha kadosh, because the holy, let's say God's presence is in your midst. Lo avo be'ir, I God won't come to the city. What does that mean? Amalei, he said to him, Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan, and here's what Rabbi Yochanan says. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, God said, Lo avo b'Yerushalayim shel ma'ala, I won't go into the heavenly city, to the Jerusalem of above, ad shavo Yerushalayim shel mata, until I go into the Jerusalem below. So B'kir B'cha Kadosh, until, there has to first be God's presence in your midst. Until that happens, I won't enter into the heavenly city. So Yerushalayim Lamala, is there such a concept of a heavenly Jerusalem? Yes, Tichsiv, it says, Yerushalayim ha-binuya ki'ir shechubra la yachtav. They built Jerusalem like the city that has chubra la, come together, joined together. So what that means, Rashi says, is it means that it's been twinned with the Jerusalem above. If you look at Rashi, 4 lines from the bottom, Yerushalayim ha-binuya ki'ir shechubra la yachtav, Yerushalayim shel mata tehi binuya ki'ir shechubra la shehu kiyotze ba chaverta. So the Jerusalem will be built like the city that it is twin to, and that it is that it is identical to, which is the one of the heavenly Jerusalem above. Of course, this is a very powerful idea in Kabbalistic thought about this idea of a Jerusalem below corresponding to a Jerusalem above corresponding to a Jerusalem below. I mean, you even have it going back to the whole Sulam of Yaakov, and Shar HaShamayim, and so some sense of, if you think that happened not just in Beit El, but also somehow on Har Habayis in Yerushalayim, then you have a link. Then you have that idea over there.
It's a huge Christic concept. The early church loved this idea.
Really?
Well, it's what?
It's a huge early Christian theology.
Really? In what way?
That the ideal of God's kingdom on earth is the reflection of God's kingdom in heaven. And it's a very highly developed by.
Do we know that it started? We know that it started from the Christians, and
I don't know. I'm just
very often Rabbi Yochanan is first generation Amoraim in Eretz Yisrael, so it's like early 3rd century.
Right. So this was all I know is that this was a concept that was appropriated and highly developed by Saint Augustine.
Interesting.
A century.
Right. Well, he wrote. He wrote a book on it, right? What was it called? City of God. City of God.
City of God is his development of this concept.
He lived in North Africa.
In the 7 years of Ramadan.
So
the Tophakah, it doesn't say, I will come. If you did this, I will come with you 7 times worse.
Yeah.
So this is like
you're right. The psukim about the 7 years also evokes that whole the Basar B'nei Ham is also like
worse and worse.
Yes, exactly, and those psukim of the Tochacha as well exactly do mention this eating of the flesh of one's own children.
Not of themselves.
Okay, but not of themselves. It didn't get that drastic. Okay, so that introduces this idea of Yerushalayim Shamala, which is a very powerful idea, and as Joe pointed out, also finds its parallel in Christian thought. Okay, V'amalei Rav Nachman Rav Yitzchak. Rav Nachman said to Rav Yitzchak, "My dechsiv, what's meant by the verse? Uba'achas yiva'aru v'kaslu musar havalim eitu. So as one, they will be destroyed and will become foolish. The musar, the chastisement of emptiness. It is a stick, or it is wood. So anyway, I had no idea what that pasuk meant. So I looked it up in my JPS translation, and it gave me one of those notes. Meaning of Hebrew, uncertain. So let's see what the Gemara does with this. So Amalei, Hachia, what does this supposed to mean? Like the other things, he had like questions about it.
Well, Rabbi didn't understand it either.
I understand, but the other ones you had specific questions. How could you have Yoreh in Nisan, right? How could it be, what did they eat during the 7 years? What does this mean that there won't be God's, God won't come to the city until, what city, until like the Kadosh is in our midst? What does all that mean? Like there's a specific question. Here he just didn't understand the pasuk at all. What does this mean? So Amalei, so Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan, this is what Rabbi Yochanan says. Achat hi shemiva'eret risha'im begehenom. There's one sin that destroys the wicked in Gehenna. Like there's one sin that's worse than all of them. Achat yivaru. So Mahi, what is that? Avodah Zarah. It's idolatry. Ksivacha musar havalim eitzu. So there you get the idea of it's nonsense. It's hevel and it's eitzu. It's like a it's a stick. You play bowing down to sticks and stones, to hewn images. So the ksiv hasam, and it says over there, hevel hema ma'asei ta'atuim. Right? It is nonsense. It is vapor. It is meaningless. It is the acts of foolishness. So, and that's clearly referring to avodah zarah. So that sin of avodah zarah causes all the wicked to be destroyed. The Amalei Rav Nachman Rav Yitzchak, and Rav Nachman also said to Rav Yitzchak, my dechsiv, and now this is going to be continuing on this theme here. What's meant by the verse? Kishtayim ra'ot asa ami. My nation did 2 evils to me. What are the 2 evils? So and he said even more than that. Tartinu dahavin. What? Only 2 bad things we did? Esin v'arba shvikalu. They abandoned all 24. Now, what does that mean? 24. So Rashi first says there's psukim in Yechezkel that list 24 sins, or it means the 24 svarim of Tanakh. Some have the gears of 22 and try to figure out what 22 it's referring to. But basically, they did a lot worse than just 2 bad things. So what do you mean these 2 bad things the people did? So Amalei, Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan, this is what Rabbi Yochanan says, Achas shehi shkula kishtayim. No, there's one thing that counts as 2. So it's not the only bad thing, but there's one sin that really is 2 sins. Shtayim ra'ot asu ami. Umayniu avodah zarah. Deceive, and it's idolatry. And it says, and here it is in the pasuk. I mean, just quote the whole pasuk. It's clear what it's talking about. Kishtayim ra'ot asa ami. 2 evils my nation has done. Otia zavu mekor mayim chayim. They abandoned me, the well of living water, the source of life. Wachtzov lahem barot nishbarim, to go and dig for themselves, other wells that don't have any water for them. So, the first evil is they abandoned me. And the second evil is that they abandoned me for something that wasn't even worth it, and it was for these for these other gods that had no value to them. Okay, now v'ksiv behu, and if you take a look, it says by the other nations, ki avru iye kitiyim v'ra'u v'kedar shalchu v'hitbonenu me'od. So from the islands of the Kitiyim, they have sent, they passed by, and Kedar has sent messengers, and they have, to see what has happened to the nation, that they've been destroyed, and they were and they sort of were astounded, and they said, Hahemer goy Elohim, v'hemer lo Elohim, v'ami heimir kvodo. I'm sorry, God says, these nations, has it ever happened that a nation has, replaced its God? And, even these nations, they never gave up their gods, and they aren't even real gods. And my nation, replaced my kvodo, but it's like kvodi. They replaced me and my honor for something that is worthless. So even the people who had worthless gods never traded them in, and you have abandoned me and traded me in for a worthless god.
So loyalty is more important than truth.
What do you mean?
Well, in other words, what upsets God here more than belief in something false is adulterating or abandoning the relationship. It's loyalty.
Well, but there's 2 points. One is abandoning the relationship, and the other is like, let's finish reading this, okay? So it says like this. So it says, Tana, Kutim ovdim la'esh, the Kutim worship the fire, v'kaderim ovdim lamayim, and the Kaderim worshipped water. The afu b'sheyodim shamayim mechabim et ha'esh, even though the fire worshippers understood that water extinguishes fire, so they could have logically said, should water the God of water rather than the God of fire? He's the more powerful God. They did not replace their gods for other gods. The ami hemir kvodi or kvodo below yo'il. So, and my nation has exchanged me for something that is worthless. So that's a double sin. The double sin is it's abandoning me. So that's the sort of loyalty issue. But it's then, if we could understand why you did it, that might have made some sense. It still would have been terrible, but at least it could have understood it. But then they exchanged it for something that was completely worthless, and that was the second evil. Now, it is interesting, by the way, that these things seem to come a little bit in pairs, I think, right? Because the first two questions were about famine, were about these psukim, or about Yorel Makosh Barishon, which is at the heels of the famine, and then it's the question about Vara'av Sheva Shanim. So those two are, obviously related. And then this next one was B'chir B'cha Kadosh. Well, maybe that wasn't actually connected to anything. But then the next two are about Avodah Zarah, right? B'chat Ivaru was about Avodah Zarah, and then this one also is about Avodah Zarah. Okay. Anyway, so now the Gemara continues. Again, Rav Nachman asking Rav Yitzchak about psukim. My dichsiv, what's meant by the verse? Vayhi kasher zaken Shmuel, and it was when Shmuel grew old. Umisiv Shmuel kalei. Did Shmuel really grow so old? He was only 52 years when he died. Damar Mar, Meis ben Nun Bet Shanaf, somebody dies at 52 years old. So Zuhi Mitato Shel Shmuel HaRamati, that's the same age as Shmuel HaRamati. That's in another Gemara where it speaks about, whether, what the sort of, the significant, symbolic, or not even symbolic, like, the whole Gemara is trying to figure out what is a Misa of Kares, what is a Misa, what these Misas, what different deaths at different ages sort of signify about a person and a person's deeds. So anyway, at 52 years, that's the age of Shmuel. Tosos tries to figure it out based on the psukim. But he was only 52, so it wasn't like he got so old. So the Gemara says, Amarle, Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan, again a response in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Zikna Kafza Alav. Old age jumped upon him. He grew, he had all the appearances of old age before his time. Now, why was that? Because the verse says, "Nichamti ki imlachti et Shaul." I have, I regret that I have made Shaul the king. This is obvious. This is after the whole story with Amalek and him not carrying out God's command. So Amar Lefanov. So Shmuel said to God, Ribona Shalom, Master of the universe, Shakaltani k'Moshe Aaron. You have weighed me equivalent to Moshe and Aaron. Tichsiv Moshe Aaron b'choanav. Ushmuel b'korei Shmuel. So I'm, Moshe and Aaron, and then parallel to that is Shmuel. So, Ma Moshe Aaron lo batlu masa yedehem b'chayehem. The same way Moshe and Aaron, what they had created wasn't negated in their lives. Rashi says this is referring to Yehoshua as sort of the next, heir apparent, that Moshe and Aaron died and Yehoshua, who had been designated, took over, and it didn't come to naught. Afani lo yitbatel maaseh yadai b'chayai. Even I, what I've created by my hands, quite fascinating, the idea of maaseh yadai, right? What I fashioned by my hands. But okay, he did anoint Shaul as the king, so he does have that sense of designating. So what I have created, Shaul as king, let it not end in my life. Let me first die before Shaul loses his kingship. So Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu. So God said, okay, hey Chiyavid, what should I do now? Lemos Shaul, should Shaul die? So, which is what I want to do. I want to kill Shaul because of this sin. So Lo Kashavik Shmuel. Shmuel won't let me. I like the idea. Lo Kashavik, he won't allow me. By the way, this other thing, talking about the comparison to Moshe, of course, this evokes, how Moshe would pray to God, right? That God wants to wipe out the people, and Moshe there would say, not Maaseh Yadai, but Moshe would sort of say, well, God, what is everybody else going to say? This people you took out of Egypt and you slaughtered them in the wilderness. How will that reflect on you? But it does have this idea of interceding on behalf of, to stop God from carrying out his vow or his will to punish the people that deserve punishment. So I can't go ahead and kill Shaul. Shmuel won't let me. Let Shmuel die first. Adizuter, because he's still young, Miranini Abasre, people will gossip about him, and they'll say, "Oh, why did Shmuel die so young? It must be he wasn't such a tzaddik. He wouldn't have died at such a young age." Lo lemus Shmuel, just leave it. Let Shaul live and let Shmuel live. No, kfar higia malchus David. It's time for David to take over. Ve'ein malchus nogas bechaverta afilu kamalei nima. And one kingship doesn't touch the other even by a hairbreadth. So when it's time for the David's time to come, Shaul's time has to be over. Can't sort of let those two be competing. Although, of course, a lot of the story of David was about Shaul anticipating what was going to happen and all of the jealousy. But nevertheless, when it actually is time for David, Shaul's period has to be completely over. So I have to, and I can't postpone David's time is also presumably the idea. There's a fixed time when it's time for David to be king. So what am I going to do? So Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu Akpitz alav zikna. Let me sort of jump upon him. Have to make a transitive word out of jump. Anyway, to place upon him old age. Hainu tichsiv. So that's what the pasuk says. V'Shaul yoshev b'giva. Shaul was sitting in the valley. Tachas ha'eshel barama. Under the eshel, like the orchard in Ramah. So there's a problem. Ramah is a high place. Giva is a valley. The kimayim and Giva etzel Ramah. Ela lomar lecha, to tell you, mi garm l'shol sheyeshev b'giv'ah, what allowed Shaul to continue dwelling in Giv'ah, that he didn't die right after the sin of Amalek, shtei shanim umechsa, for 2.5 years, tfilato shel Shmuel haramati, it was the prayer of Shmuel, so Shaul was yoshev b'giv'ah birama, through the agency of Shmuel of Haramati. Okay, so that explains that pasuk about why he was 52 years old, and it says he was very old. Now the Gemara has a question.
Wait, how does it explain the zikna from the Giva and the Ramah?
No, it just says no. That's not the zikna, but it shows this idea that it was due to Shmuel's intervention. He was yoshev b'giva b'Ramah, through the agency of the one from Ramah, through the agency of Shmuel Haramati. Okay, so now the Gemara says, Umi mitwer. Okay, right. Umi mitchi gavra mikmi gavra. Is one person pushed away for another person? Now, who's being pushed away for whom? So Rashi says that Shmuel, God basically had to hurry everything up. Once Shmuel interceded, because it was time for David to be king. So in the end, what happened was Shmuel had to die, so Shaul could die, so David could be king. So are you going to go ahead and push aside one person, Shmuel, for the benefit of David? So yes. Now, of course, could have all said, look, it's part of the bigger divine plan that there's a time for David to be king. But the way it's framing it here, it's like, it's not fair for David. It's David's time. So it's making it, well, so what? So you're giving up one person for another person. Why is that appropriate? It's not fair for Shmuel.
Those two things are linked. It's like a shofet kol haaretz v'le'aseh mishpat. That is, you've got a larger divine plan.
Right.
The Melech has to become king. Can the ends really justify the means?
Yes, that you could have asked that, but the Gemara is particularly framing it not like, would you push aside a person just because this is part of the divine plan? There, the answer is easier. The Gemara is framing it as mi mitchi gavra mikmi gavra. So it's about David. It's David's time. It's not fair that David should have to wait. Okay, but it's not fair that Shmuel should have to die early. Right, so that's what it's about being fair to David. So you can't. How do you exchange? I got to be fair to David for not being fair to Shmuel. That's the way the Gemara is framing it, not in some divine plan way. So let's take a look what the answer is. Yes, the Amar Reb Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Reb Yonasan. My dechsiv, what's meant by the verse? Al kein chatzavti b'nevi'im haraktim b'imrei pi. Therefore, I have hewn down the prophets. I have killed them with the words of my mouth. B'masem lo nemar. Doesn't say that they died through their deeds, like it was their time to die necessarily. Ela b'imrei pi, my edict. So even if it wasn't their time, sometimes God will decree. Alma mitchi gavra, mikmi gavra. One person will be pushed away for another. It's a very unsatisfying answer. Okay, so you said it based on a pasuk, but if you really frame it that way, right, the power of the question doesn't go away, right? If it's really about how can you, yes, sometimes God decrees one person has to die, so it could be time for another person. Again, if it's about the divine plan has to play out, it makes more sense. But if it's about being fair to David, which seems to be how it was framing the question, then it really hasn't answered the question.
Why is it about the
Yeah.
Shmuel got what he asked for.
Yes, but
he didn't want to witness.
Right. So this will be the consequence of me keeping to your, right, to what you said. It's not right. It's right. Yeah, it's true. I mean, God could have allowed, as the Gemara said, God to listen to Shmuel and let Shmuel live a natural life. But but it is true that Shmuel is right. You can't say it's not fair.
No.
Well, right. The Gemara sort of, that's sort of it's fascinating that that's the power of the Gemara. Like, I can't kill Shmuel because Shmuel won't let me. Like, it's like that image. I love the image that Rashi quotes in the pasuk by where is it? What's the pasuk? The pasuk is ve'ata hanichali. Now, like leave me and let me, and I will, I will wipe out this person. So Rashi says, like, what is he like holding him by his shirt and not letting him? But I think that's sometimes how Chazal imagine the power of the tefillah of the tzaddik is like, won't let God, like let me. But so yes, I think it's powerful that it didn't say God was going to override. But I think your other point is correct. I mean, what do you mean? It's how can we do it to David? It's not being fair to Shmuel. I mean, Shmuel basically brought this upon himself. So it is, that's the right choice. Yeah, it's a very good point. I don't know why the Gemara does not introduce that. All right, so the Gemara says like this. So this was a long, discussion, not all from Rav Nachman and Rav Yitzchak, but that the Gemara continued. But it started with this Rav Nachman Rav Yitzchak discussion as well about why did it say that Shmuel was so old? So now the Gemara says. Where were we? Okay. Rav Nachman Rav Yitzchak have a yasi b'sudasa. So then, now they were sitting at a meal. So Amalei Rav Nachman Rav Yitzchak, Lemer Mar Milsa. So Rav Nachman said to Rav Yitzchak, maybe for once he didn't have a question, he didn't have a pasuk to ask him. So he said, hey, could you say it's Var Torah? So Amalei, so he said to him, so Hachi Amar Rav Yochanan, this is what Rav Yochanan says, Ein Masichim B'Suda. You're not allowed to talk during a meal. Great answer. Okay, Shema Yaktim Kana Lemeshet. Lest the lest the esophagus, the trachea go in front of the esophagus, meaning lest the food go down the trachea rather than the esophagus. You'll be talking, so the cover of your windpipe will be open, and the food will go down your trachea, and therefore you don't talk during a meal. Now, the interesting thing I need to say here is that Rashi says it doesn't mean like will come, sort of like physically come in front of. It just means that it will go down first to the trachea rather than the esophagus because your windpipe is open. That's important because, in the Gemara Pesachim about why you have to do Heseba, why you have to lean on the left, it says because if you lean on the right, Yaktim Kana Leveshet, which leads a lot of Rishonim to think that the Kana and the Veshet are like side by side, left and right. So if you lean to the right, it's going to go down the trachea, and they think that the trachea is on the right, and that's the problem. Why does that matter? It matters because of the question of which direction a lefty leans. So if you actually think that's very important to me. So if you actually think that it's right and left, and the problem is that it physically gets to there first, then even a lefty has to lean on the right. So I don't lean on the right. Have you ever tried to? Even a lefty has to lean. Even a lefty has to lean on the left. Even a lefty has to lean on the left. But of course, that would be very hard. The hand you're feeding yourself with. So I go by the Rishon that says that Yaktim Kana Leveshes does not mean they're side by side. It means if you're leaning on the side that you're using that hand, it's very awkward to be eating with the hand that, on the side you're leaning from, so the food will go down the wrong pipe. It's just a way of saying the food will go down the wrong pipe. So if that's true for a lefty has to lean on the right. The righty leans on the left. That's what I do. But as actually the halacha, it's generally paskin that even a lefty leans on the left because of this understanding about the geographical location of the Kana and the Veshet. Yes.
Steinsaltz has accurate anatomical and physiological diagram
about how that will happen, that the food will go down the wrong direction.
Yeah, and it's not left and right.
Right. Anyway, you wonder how he said that to him. Like, how did he even respond that you can't talk in the meal? He was talking in the meal to respond, but okay. This has happened to me once, that somebody said something to me, like in the bathroom, and I had to say, like, oh, you're not supposed to talk to her in the bathroom. Like, exactly how you figure that one out. Anyway, okay. So the Gemara says, v'yavoli de sakana. So anyway, you don't want the food to go down the trachea, and it'll lead to danger. Basar desoid. After they ate, Amarle, then he said, now let's talk Torah. Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. This is what Rabbi Yochanan said. Yaakov Avinu lo meis. Yaakov, our father, never died. Okay. Amalei. So I guess they were already talking about endangering your life. Maybe he picked up on that topic. Oh, Amalei. So Rabbi Yitzchak said back. So finally we got a little response. Until now there has not been much of a response. I mean, Rav Nachman said back. Rav Nachman hasn't really responded. So Amalei. So Rav Nachman said back. Saftu Saftanaya, V'chantu Chantaya? Was it for naught that the eulogizers eulogized and the embalmers embalmed? The Kavru Kivraya and the buriers buried? So Amalei, he said back to him, Mikrani Doresh, look, I'm getting it from a pasuk. You're the one who's always quoting psukim to me. I'm getting this from a pasuk of Rabbi Yochanan. It's interesting. It says Ani Doresh, but he's saying in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Anyway, Shenemar, as the verse says, the Ata al Tira V'di Yaakov, do not fear my servant Jacob. Ne'um Hashem, Al Techat Yisrael, do not tremble Israel. Ki hineni moshiacha me'rachok ve'et zaracha me'eretz shivyam. I will save you, presumably Yaakov, from a faraway land, and the sea, and your children from the land of their captivity. So Makish, who is Zaro? God is linking Yaakov to Yaakov's descendants. Ma'zaro b'chaim, the same way the children are alive. They're in captivity, but they're alive. Avhu b'chaim, he's alive. And God will, so Rashi says, God will save first Yaakov and then bring him to see in the redemption of his children. So that I will save you, and then I will save your children. But you are like your children, they are alive, you are alive. Now Tosfos points out, if you take a look, that this really is based on a response to a pasuk that's in the Torah by Yaakov's death. If you take a look at Tosfos, Yaakov Avinu lo meis, he says, L'chein mashma dichsiv vayigva. V'loksiv vayamot. Right? By all of the people, it says vayigva vayamot. He expired and he died. And it doesn't say it by Yaakov. So it's really pointing out an anomaly in the pasuk. So what does this mean that Yaakov did not die? And what does this mean? But didn't they embalm him? So Rashi makes it sound like he's treating the Gemara very literally. Like it says, yeah, they thought they were embalming him, but it really wasn't working. And he basically was still alive. So, which is a little creepy. But anyway, the Marsha translates this as, means, he says, we're talking not about the life of the body, we're talking about the life of the soul. So then the Marsha says, but then why is it unique to Yaakov, right? I mean, the Gemara says always, tzadikim afilu b'mitotam kruim chayim, the soul lives on forever. So the Marsha says, well, maybe what's bothering, it's interesting, maybe what's bothering the Gemara is the idea that Yaakov was buried in Chutz La'aretz, and the Gemara sort of says that, the only people that will sort of be resurrected are those that are buried in Eretz Yisrael, and everybody else has to, somehow their bodies have to roll to Eretz Yisrael before they're resurrected. So maybe that's what's bothering, as opposed to Avraham and Yitzchak that were buried in Eretz Yisrael. That's what's bothering the Gemara, and therefore, the Gemara has to underscore that afu b'chayim. But I think whatever that works in terms of that, I think the more powerful point is, and this also might be the idea of Zaro, because Avram and Yitzchak both had descendants that were not part of Bnei Yisrael, whereas by Yaakov, you don't know sometimes. I mean, just think the name is Yisrael. Right? The whole name of the nation is the name of Yaakov. So Zaro b'chayim, Afu b'chayim, is making a very powerful statement about the idea about what, sort of like what you create and your descendants, and they live after you, and that's the way that in which, you gain eternal life. You remain alive. So in a way, even more powerfully than Avram and Yitzchak, Yaakov's children, even in the pasuk, right? Avdi Yaakov, Al Techat Yisrael. Yisrael is another name of Yaakov. So Mazdao b'chayim, Afu b'chayim. Which of course reminds me of the Woody Allen line where Woody Allen said, I don't want to gain immortality through my work. I want to gain immortality through not dying. So here, though, this is actually a very lovely Gemara to quote also at a, when appropriate to use in a eulogy, because the idea about how the descendants and the children carry on the memory and carry on the teachings of the one who has passed away, and as long as Zaro b'chayim, Afu b'chayim. All right, so now the Gemara continues. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Now we just have a straight Amar Rabbi Yitzchak without Rav Nachman first prompting him. Kol ha'omer, but we'll see. There still will be a part of a discussion with Rav Nachman. Maybe this was in the same after the meal discussion. Kol ha'omer rachav miyad nikri. Anybody who says the word Rachav twice, Rachav was the prostitute from the whole story about Yehoshua. So what? Yeah, automatically he becomes a Baal Keri, has a seminal emission because it's just so much erotic imagination. So Amar Le Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman said to him, Ana mina v'lo ichpasli. Hey, I tried it. It didn't work. But anyway, I said it and it didn't make a difference. So Amalei, no, ki kamina, what was I talking about? Biyoda b'makira. If you actually evoked a memory, somebody who knew her and recognized her, Tosfos goes further to say yoda even means had sex with her. So if it evokes a real memory, then that's what it leads to, not a magic of saying the name. Okay, now kihavi mifteri me'adadi, now the wrap up. So they were finally departing from one another. Amalei, he said to him, Livarchan Mar, let the master give me a bracha. Now it's not clear who said to whom. And one imagines that since Rav Nachman is the one always asking the question, and Rav Yitzchak is the one always giving the answer, so Rav Nachman is saying to Rav Yitzchak, give me a bracha.
Are they different generations? One older?
I don't know. I don't know exactly. Clearly, Rav Yitzchak is the more, senior, whether it's senior in years or in wisdom, but seems to be the one that's more teaching Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman said, let the master give me a blessing. Amarle, he said to him, Em Shalucha Mashal, very famous mashal in the Gemara. Let me give you a mashal. Let me give you a what's a mashal? How do you translate mashal? Parable. Thank you. Lemad davar domeh. What is this like? La'adam shayaholich b'midbar v'hayara'ev v'ayef v'tzamei. A person was going in the wilderness and he was hungry and weary and thirsty. Umatza ilan, and he found a tree. Sheperosav mitukim. The fruit was sweet. V'tzilo na'eh. The shade was beautiful. The amat hamayim over tachtav, and a brook of water was passing by under it. Achal miperotav, he ate from the fruit. V'shatam mimeimav, and he drank from the water. V'yashav b'tzilo, and he dwelt under the shade. When he wanted to leave, Amar, he said, Ilan, b'meh varchecha, tree, what should I bless you? If I were to give you a blessing that your fruit should be sweet, they're already sweet. That your shade should be pleasant. Your shade is pleasant. You should have a brook of water passing by you. You're already blessed with this. Ella, rather, all future saplings that are planted from you kamotcha, will be just as blessed and will, live up to, to exactly how you are blessed. Be blessed just as well. Afata, so even you, says Rav Nachman to Rav Yitzchak to Rav Nachman. Now this is quite fascinating because clearly Rav Yitzchak is the one that had all the Torah. Like he was the one that had all the creative answers, right? Rav Nachman was the one asking the questions. But nevertheless, he said, right, good questions are also very important. And he said, how shall I bless you? Imba Torah, hare Torah. Imba Osher, hare Osher. Imba Banim, hare Banim. You're already blessed with Torah, with wealth, with children. Elohi Ratzah, may be God's will. Now this is very funny because it says, let the descendants of your womb be like you. So, again, gets to the whole sort of the men talking about, thinking about the children as, sort of the woman is not exactly, or they're taking over the woman's functions. But anyway, but he says all of your children should be just as blessed as you are. We'll end with that today. Okay.
It's a strange use of me'echa.
Well, that's what I'm saying. What?